Good evening and welcome to the City Council meeting for July the 13th, 2012. We'll begin by asking the City Secretary to call the roll.
Councilman De La Garza?
Present.
Councilman Bachnight?
Here.
Councilwoman Scott?
Here.
Councilman Young? He's not on Zoom or anything, James?
No, he's not going to be
Okay, and then Councilman Lofgren?
Here.
And Mayor Pro Tem Solis.
here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we will take a moment of silence to allow each member of the City Council and those in attendance to prepare their hearts and minds to appropriately do the business of our city. Thank you. You may be seated. Sitting in the council chambers remains limited to allow for social distancing, and there are still many residents in our high-risk population. For those reasons, we will also continue allowing citizen participation through video conferencing. To learn about all the ways that you can watch the meeting and participate remotely, we encourage you to visit www.victoriatex.gov/talk-to-council. There are many options for how you can participate in our meeting tonight, ranging from watching on TV or speaking in citizens' comments through Zoom. For those citizens that wish to speak in person to the council during citizens' communication or during a public hearing, we ask that you complete a comment card and give it to a staff member. Comment cards are located outside of the door of the council chambers. At this time, the City Secretary and Elections Administrator Margaret Hill will present the office election results from the special election held July the 3rd, 2021 for the canvassing.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Solis and Council. Tonight we'll be canvassing the July 3rd special election for the place of Mayor and District 3 Representative. Elections Administrator Hill is here to deliver the results of the election, and copies of the results were also placed on the dais for each of you. There you are.
Good afternoon. These are the results from the July 3rd special election. For Mayor, Jeff Boatnight, 3,458, 69.38% of the votes. David Crook, 254, 5.10%. Emmett Alvarez, 1,272, 25.52% of the votes. For Councilmember District 3, Aaron Franco, 183, 7.96% of the votes. Dwayne Crocker, 955, 41.54% of the votes. Joe Geisman, 264, and 11.48% of the votes. Lee Andrew Cantu, 372, 16.18% of the votes. And Chad Austin Hall, 525, 22.84% of the votes. I do hereby certify that this is true and correct summary of the votes that were cast on July 3rd, 2021, special election for the City of Victoria, and accompanying these pages represents the votes cast in each precinct within the district.
Do you have any questions for Ms. Hillary? Okay. So the only official action that we need tonight from council is for council to officially accept the results of the election, and Mayor Pro Tem Solis would sign the canvas form that's there on the dais for her. And if any of you are interested in retallying the votes, we could certainly do that if you would like.
Do we accept the votes by a motion?
No, ma'am, as long as she signs the canvas form and y'all are, no one's in disagreement of that, then we can
Okay, thank you.
move forward.
You gave me a bunch of forms, but I'll get together with you which one I need to
Yes,
sign
ma'am.
first.
Yes, ma'am. So there's also an additional form there at this time because no one in the District 3 race received a majority of the vote. So there's a certification form to certify the runoff election, that a runoff election is needed, and to certify that Dwayne Crocker and Chad Austin Hall will be the candidates for that as they received, they were the top two vote getters in the District 3 race. So you will also certify that.
By
through
signing the
Yes, ma'am.
documents, okay,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
And thank you, Ms. Hill, for coming.
Okay. So the last thing that we need to do that's associated with this election is to issue the certificate of election and statement of office to Councilman Bachnight. And Mayor Pro Tem Solis has those, sir, and she'll be handing those over.
So you want us to go down there?
No, you should be. You can just pass it.
Just pass it to him? This is in the name of, and by authority of the City of Victoria, this is to certify that a special election held on July the 3rd, 2021, Jeff Balknight was duly elected mayor. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. And then I need you to sign your oath, or your statement.
And we will be swearing in Councilman Bachnight at the next regular meeting on the 20th to officially become the mayor.
Mr. Garza, do we have any announcements this evening, I'm sorry?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, and Mayor-elect Bachnight. We do not have any announcements for this evening.
Okay, good. Are there any items otherwise listed on the agenda for which members of the city council would like to request specific factual information, a recitation of existing policy, or a placement for on a further agenda? Okay. We do have under citizens' communication, as a reminder, citizens' communication may be done either in person or through video conferencing. We would encourage anyone who has any recent exposure to COVID-19 or those that may be in a high-risk population group to make use of the video conferencing option. These instructions are again available at www.victoriatech.gov/talk to council. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes in duration and will be received by audio only. There will not be an opportunity to provide any presentation or visual material either in person or via teleconference. Please remember to silence any cell phones, televisions, or other background noise so that we can hear your comments clearly. It is generally the practice of the City Council not to respond to the comments made during this time, but city staff will be available to follow up as necessary. If you wish to speak about an item scheduled for a public hearing later this evening, please refrain from commenting until we reach that point in the agenda. I do have one communication card from Dr. Shook. Dr. Shook, you want to come up?
Mayor, Council, my name's Robert Shook. I've lived in Victoria 64 years and have retired some years ago from the faculties at Victoria College and University of Houston, Victoria. Let's see, is it three? I think 3 minutes we have now,
Yes, sir.
not 5.
Right.
Okay. What concerns me is the indication of what I overheard not long ago. Sitting here in the council chambers was the idea that Victoria, Texas should change its nickname. There's a long word for nickname, but I don't use them unless I can spell them. And I don't spell this one well. Nickname. From Crossroads to Destination City. Well, I spent those 64 years, or most of them, looking at and collecting and publishing admissible evidence, all of it proving Victoria is the most unique city in Texas. We can talk more about that later. I got it drawn up for you. But the idea of trading a nickname like Crossroads, and I have never seen in either language, because there are two we use in understanding Victoria. In all the documents and maps that I've looked at through over a long period of time, I've never seen anything at all except Crossroads as a consequence of reading and checking to see that that is true. Now I understand where Destination City comes from. But I question the source, since it is also the source of a very interesting but childish concept of reducing our Confederate statue, I guess, to molten metal or whatever those folks do, who apparently spent most of their university or college days studying diversity and gender rather than math, physics, political science, economics, etc. So I also want to say, and I will be using up, I hope, not my 3 minutes, but we went through this years ago, many of you remember. The taxpayers, knowledgeable I think they were not, in buying a nickname from an advertising company in Tennessee. Well, I spoke to a representative of that company on the telephone and asked them how they might go about this 70-some-odd $1,000 for a nickname. They explained it, but not well. They use a system a little bit like the Rorschach test. You see a picture and then you respond. Oh, we do a wonderful job, the lady said in Tennessee, in researching before we recommend nicknames for cities. We will go to Houston, Austin, and Corpus Christi, and we will ask the business leaders to respond quickly when we say the word Victoria. Now, if that's research, I don't know what that makes all of us who know better. But that was not successful. I assume that the contract was kept, but I made something less than a friend from the promoter of moving our nickname from what it has always been in reality. We served Victoria before it was ever called Victoria, served the entire west of that time from Matagorda Bay. We were crossroads from day one before Don Martin de Leon got his contract, his grant. So I would encourage you to maintain, continue to use Crossroads, mainly because in a practical way, the banker, a vice president of one of our major banks, and a colleague of mine, an economist by training, made a careful survey of all the surrounding counties to determine an argument for the legislature to allow for branch banking. Now, this was some time ago. And we know, of course, by looking around, that that legislation passed. But they determined, without any kind of encouragement, that that carefully worked out economic analysis, let alone the history and the maps, made us a crossroads in terms of commerce. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to handle them. I didn't keep track of the time.
Okay.
I think I ran over.
A little bit.
A little,
But we
I'm sorry.
appreciate your history, and thank you, Dr. Schick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under items for public hearing, April is going to read the items for public hearing.
Okay, item C1 is an ordinance calling a runoff election to be held August 21st, 2021 to determine the representative to City Council District 3. This item is on emergency reading.
I'll read it in Spanish very briefly. Ordenanza donde se convoca una segunda elección el 21 de agosto del 2021 para escoger el representante del Consejo Municipal Distrito 3.
Good evening again, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Tonight, this ordinance will call a runoff election for the representative of Council District 3. As explained earlier, that no one received a majority of the vote. So the candidates for the runoff election would be Dwayne Crocker and Chad Austin Hall. Section 7, or Article 7, Section 2 of the city charter does call that we must immediately call for a runoff election after canvassing the votes if there's not a clear majority winner in that vote. So if anybody have any questions, I'll be glad to help. We do need to have a public
We do
hearing.
need to have a motion? Okay.
A public hearing as well.
Oh, a public hearing. I'm sorry.
That's it.
Okay, we're opening for a public hearing on this ordinance, please. Anyone here to address us on that? Seeing none, I'll open for a motion.
I move we adopt this ordinance.
I second it.
It's been first and seconded to adopt ordinance number 1, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, staff will provide a presentation at this point.
So, all right. Kind of threw me off there. But
I'm sorry, item
the-
D1 is a discussion on proposed 2021 international building codes.
Good evening, council.
Oh, okay.
So before I get started, I just wanted to point out that you have two handouts that were laid on the dais. One is a summary from our workshops on the code adoption that covers everything except for the fire code, and then another one is a separate standalone document relating to just the fire code. So that will be helpful as we go through this presentation for y'all to follow along with. So as a reminder, we are asking council to adopt the 2021 ICC codes at the next council meeting. Before I turn it over to Rick and Tom to go into specifics, I do have some general comments. As a reminder, the International Residential Code is the code that deals with all things residential. So whenever we're talking about the mechanical code, the plumbing code, fuel and gas code, those are related to commercial applications of those codes. And when we're talking about, mechanical systems in a residence, all of that is within the International Residential Code. The other kind of big overarching theme is that all the codes are driven by occupancies. So as you read through some of this, it'll talk about, an R1 occupancy, R4 occupancy, and those, residential occupancies or assembly occupancies. And a lot of the amendments and codes are driven by those different occupancies. And then we have the presentation separated by significant changes, which are highlighted in those documents. And then also our significant local amendments, which we pulled out of the ordinance, the ones that we feel are most significant. But of course, we can talk about any local amendment. And just as a reminder, our local amendments often make the code easier, or it is just the continuation of a longstanding local practice. A lot of times, though, those local practices end up actually getting changed into the code because they're sort of industry standards. The other thing that is important to remember is that the state of Texas has adopted architectural licensing or architecture requirements as well as engineering requirements. And so a lot of our amendments deal with the thresholds that you find in those state statutes. So we have, I won't go over this chart, but if you kind of just look, you'll see there's construction costs exceed $50,000. Yes, then you're probably going to have to engage an architect. Construction costs exceed, 100,000. Or there's also square footage requirements. 5,000 square foot is a big trigger, and 20,000 square foot is a big trigger. So whenever we're talking about our amendments, and we are tying those amendments to scale, such as buildings under 5,000 square foot or buildings over, 5,000 square foot. Oftentimes, it's because of these acts where we are requiring, where they're, the scale of those buildings could require that the property owner bring on an architect or an engineer to do more design work. So that was the architecture kind of flow chart, and this is the professional engineer flow chart. So it's just some kind of good overall pointers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to go over the first code, which is the International Building Code.
Council, Mayor Pro Tem, good evening. So this handout, I'm going to go through it. I'm going to pick out the most significant stuff here. I don't think you want me reading everything that, if you have to use a longer nail because you've got more insulation on your wall, so that nail has to, I don't think you want me to get into the weeds like that. But I'm going to, if you do see something that, or hear something that you want to discuss, by all means, let's look it over. This handout also, it's going to have some crossover with the fire department, with fire code, because we build the code, or we build the structures and to code, and so after that we're out. Then Tom comes, or fire department comes in, and they inspect that building for the life of the structure. So, and it has to. So these codes have to match to carry it on. This is the same handout that was shared at every workshop with all the builders, stakeholders, anybody that was interested in the code adoption, the new codes coming out. So we'll just go through this. If there's anything I need to slow up on, let me know. There's a lot to cover. So this is also something that will be noticed on the field. So if I go out there and when we see something that needs to be done, we say, hey, that's a new code. Well, then the contractor should be aware of it because it was at the workshops. And so this is the heads up. So if we can start going through this one at a time. For the first page, we're going to start on the International Building Code. And so the first one there is assembly occupancies with occupant load over 300 require manual fire alarms. They're activated occupant notification system, and also for assembly occupant loads over 100 on other floor levels. So this is, the significance about this one is that you get let's say a 3-story building and you have a meeting room upstairs that's can, you can have more than 100 people in it. That's when this alarm system would be triggered. And once again, when we start crossing into the fire code, I pretty much hand that off, and Tom's department handles that. But we work in conjunction. The second one is the fire sprinkler protection in attics for multi-family buildings. There's just been expanded requirements to put fire sprinklers in attics. You'll hear that one again. I think Tom may mention that one, but that's another somewhat significant. We'll be looking for that. I'm going to go down to number 8. Extensive changes for Type 4 construction. Type 4 construction. This is a major change in code. Type 4 construction is heavy timber type construction. We don't do a lot of it. We hardly do any of it. But that section has been revamped considerably. And so if we do heavy timber, there's going to be some requirements that we have to discuss. Fire protection is a biggie. The connections for heavy timber are going to need to be a little bit more fire resistance than they used to be. But that's usually handled in the design stages. Usually you have a professional doing that type of work, that type of design. Going down to number 10, cooking in an ambulatory facility. The conditions there, basically, it's just kind of upping that for the hood system. You'll have shut-off valve for fuel. The gas will automatically shut off. And it'll have a timer deactivation, that type of stuff. Number 12 in R1, 2 occupancies, which is like a hotel, motels, apartments. A low-frequency signal shall be used in sleeping rooms to improve waking effectiveness of occupant notification device. So that's somewhat like a smoke detection system. Now, again, this is strictly commercial structures. Number 13 is the exterior exit pathways shall be illuminated to the public way. So this is basically when you have an exit door, an emergency exit door, and it applies only to emergency exits that lead out into a yard or something. We're trying not to lead people into a dark yard, a dark area, a place you can't see. So it has to be lighted. Right. And currently, we require light outside the door now, which was adopted in the 15 codes. Now the lighting has to go all the way till you're in a safe place, like a public street, something to that nature, or a good distance from the building. It could be I guess it could be parking lot lighting, So that we'll be looking for that. I'm not sure if that'll be much of a change. Okay. Number 14, the minimum illumination level for both exits and exit access stairways is increased 10-foot candles. So it used to be 1-foot candles, so that's kind of dim. 10-foot candles will probably light it up. You'll be able to see your way out. Going on to the next page. Are we good on this page so far? On the next page, number 19, is an amendment that will address reconstruction remodels of projects over 50% of assessed values to require compliance with Chapter 9 and 10. That's fire protection and exits. Now, that's on our local amendment on the PowerPoint. This is addressing buildings that are under construction where they do a major remodel and they're having to tear about most of the structure down. We've had them come in and tear the building down to the red iron. I mean, you just see a few poles standing up, and they didn't tear the building down completely, so they're allowed to continue that use that they built it under. They don't have to upgrade it. With this here would catch that and say, okay, you've torn the structure down. Now when you rebuild it, you'll need to meet the new code. That's kind of the intent of that. And the next one is a live work unit. Is addressed in the amendments. A live work unit this mainly pertains to downtown. I think it's eased up the requirements for downtown to allow more adaptability. Live work units is a like a residential, you have a residential area within your business. And so it has limitations, but it makes it a little easier to do. So the rest of that space would be used for commercial purposes. So we think that that's going to, should help benefit the downtown revitalization stuff. So that's what I have so far on commercial code. Like I said, literally there are thousands of changes, but a lot of the changes you see in these significant changes are just clarification or modifications. There might be moving it around in code. So you have a book that thick with significant changes, but really these are the ones that we're going to see some differences on. Okay, so at this point,
Actually, I've got a quick question.
yes, ma'am.
I just noticed 18, the use of intermodal shipping containers is now recognized by the building code. Recognized in what way?
I think it's given us some direction on how to start considering the use of intermodal shipping containers. From our standpoint, with commercial buildings, we will consider design. It'll need to go through professional design, have an engineer design it and show that it meets code, exits, structural wise, energy efficiency, that type of stuff. I myself have seen a building built out of intermodal shipping containers and it worked. So it wasn't in code before. So when people would come in, when designers, people would come in and ask about it, we didn't really have anything to go from. Now we have some guidelines to work with, but it mainly pertains to commercial businesses. Residential is just tough to meet. It's not in the residential code book. The requirements to use a shipping container as a residence are tough to do. So.
Okay, and you said it has to meet code, so that's really what I was wanting to hear.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Going on to the residential code. So again, this residential code, again, now it covers, in the residential book, you have the structural, you have the electrical, the plumbing, and the gas, and the energy, the installation stuff, all in one book. We'll go over some of this stuff. The energy stuff, most of it's going to be on the commercial energy, but so that will come up later. Alterations and repairs of fuel-fired mechanical systems will require a carbon monoxide detector. That's a good code. So if they're making alterations or repairs to the gas heating system, we're going to want to get smoke detector or carbon monoxide detectors in the house. Currently, they're already required when you have a garage attached to the house or when you have fuel burning appliances. The new code already requires carbon monoxide, but now on the older homes, if they don't have and they're repairing their heating system or something like that, we will be looking for carbon monoxide detection. Going down to number 6, exterior line controls will be needed to turn off exterior lights during daylight. So basically, that's an automatic device, basically, that if you have security lights out in the yard, that when the sun comes up, those lights will shut off automatically. They'll have a little detector on them. So we'll be looking for that. Number 10, kitchen work surface receptacles required each 9 square feet. That's going to be a change. Right now, we just require one outlet, one receptacle, electrical receptacle outlet on the countertop. This pertains to islands, so you just put it on the one recep. Now it's going to be required every 9 square feet. These islands are getting bigger and bigger, so you want to be able to reach your appliances over to it. You don't want to have to cross your cord back to the counter where someone could walk by and knock it over, spill a hot pot of beans on them, stuff like that. So that's a good code. And you'll notice that a lot of the builders are already doing this kind of stuff. They're ahead of it. I'm going to go down to there's a lot of stuff in here that we deleted out of code. One is that I'm not bringing up because it's not going to be an impact. Y'all won't get complaints if we're not requiring something, typically. So I'm gonna go down to number 13. Number 14, wires allowed for smoke, CO detectors, and under cabinet task lighting. We just made that a little bit easier also with all the talk of COVID where supplies were tough to get. We decided, talking with board members to, and some of the contractors, to allow number 14 wires. Some of that lighting doesn't even allow for number 12. I mean, it really doesn't fit anymore. So number 14 wire is a little bit thinner wire, but it's safe. It's allowed by the National Electrical Code. And so for these types of installations, we're going to allow number 14. Historically, all was allowed was number 12 wire, and that's a little bit thicker wire. But that's one of the lesser codes we have. I'm going to move on to the next page unless we have any questions so far.
I have one question, Rick.
Yes, ma'am.
Number 3, the garage doors shall have a label showing the wind load. How do you do that if you have an older home, I guess you would say that?
Yeah, so I should probably mention that this is not a retroactive code. So your existing garage doors and everything are allowed to continue as is. This pertains to mainly new construction, or if you're replacing a garage door, then your new garage door would have a label that says the wind load requirements. So Victoria is at 110 miles an hour. Your door would have a label that says 110 miles an hour. Yeah, in the old days, we would board up that garage door with as much plywood and bracing because that is a weak point for hurricane winds. So this will be labeled so we can verify that it meets the 110 mile an hour wind loads. Okay, on to the next page. I believe we're on going to number 17. A new table N110213 was created to address specifically Victoria and the insulation requirements pertaining to R values, U factors, solar heat gains. And along the way, we're going to hear of a few sections that reference back to this table. Now, this table in the IRC, this residential code, was it covered 8 climate zones across the entire United States. So the tables were big, and just going through there finding yours was, a challenge. So we decided to go ahead and make our own table just specifically for Victoria and put it in our amendments. So it's pretty simple to go to. This table, you can look at it and just simply say, okay, in the wall you need R13 insulation, in the ceilings you need R30 insulation. Solar heat gain in the windows is a 0.30, so it's very easy and quick for the builders to go to. And so we just tried to simplify it and make it very specific so everybody would know where to go to and get the answers. And again, I'm going to reference back to this table because in the Commercial Energy Code, we did somewhat similar. Number 19, building air leakage and duct testing remained the same. And I'm kind of just tooting our horn on this one because through the Texas A&M Systems Lab, we worked with them to get the air leakage stuff and duct stuff done. And the code was stricter than what we were, so we had it lessened. Well, the code changed to match what we did. So that tells us we're doing something right. Number 20, roof replacements. Roof replacements do not trigger insulation requirements. There was a section in the existing section of the residential code that mentioned if you were to replace your shingles on your roof, you had to install insulation in your attic. And so that kind of was a difficult thing especially during the hurricane. People weren't trying to put insulation in the attic. They were needing to put a roof on. And that was one of the energy code requirements that was mandated. We didn't follow that. We went ahead and let people roof their buildings. So we've amended that, so it doesn't trigger. If we see buildings that don't have insulation, we'll suggest that they put it in, because it's very necessary, but we don't require it at that point. Okay, so that covers the residential code requirements, the significant changes.
Number 21,
Yes, locking access,
is
port
that
kit.
refrigerant access?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Those are optional. You may or may not put them on. I got a lot of gripes from the HVAC contractors. Some said they don't work. Some said I can trick it and with a magnet take them off. And I'm like, okay, you can put them on, or you can, we'll talk about changing that. So. I just want to emphasize, we want to be energy efficient. There's going to be some areas in here, especially in this next portion, where we made a lot of amendments, and it looks like, wow, we're deleting everything. We're not, following energy code. We do want to be energy efficient. Now even more, the thing is that we were mandated with a code that was like Cadillac, and it was just more than what we needed. It didn't work in a lot of areas. What we decided to do is back up some, go back kind of to the basics of energy efficiency and stay energy efficient, keep moving forward, but make things work for us and be reasonable with it. So a lot of this stuff that you see taken out, it is backing up, but it's not lessening the energy efficiency of the structure. We build good energy efficient buildings here. We do very good here with the builders do very good here with energy construction. So that covers IRC, the residential code. If there aren't any other questions, I guess we'll move into the commercial energy code, which is referred to as the IECC. And this was one of the codes that was mandated. This is the one that we made considerable amount of changes to. Okay, so and the previous codes didn't have section numbers because we had some picture handouts at the workshops that had all the code numbers next to them. We didn't have significant changes for the IECC. That book wasn't written yet, so I don't have those type of handouts. So now, so that's the reason I put section numbers on this portion of your handout. So we'll just start off with suspended acoustical ceiling insulation. It wasn't allowed to be considered an R value or a U factor when insulation wasn't allowed to be considered when it was put on top of acoustical ceilings. So we couldn't contribute those R values at all to the project. You had to put the insulation up on the roof deck, and it created problems in a lot of areas, especially in existing structures. So what we did, here's where we're going to start seeing what Julie was mentioning about the state licensing requirements, where you have to have an engineer involved or an architect involved. So you're going to see 5,000 square foot or 20,000 square foot brought up a lot, because at that point when you're doing construction, once you reach 5,000 square foot, you have to incorporate design professionals in the structural, the electrical, the plumbing, and the mechanical systems. At this point, we would think that to try to simplify the code, to make it usable, user-friendly, we took a different look at it. I'm going to read something out of the code to kind of give you an idea of what I'm referring to. Okay, this is the deal for skylights, and I did this at the workshop, kind of try to get a point across. Let's see. Am I on a time limit? No, go ahead. Okay. Okay, so for skylights, to determine skylight, a minimum, the area of a skylight, the minimum skylight area, the top light daylight zone of not less than 3%, where all skylights have a VT of not less than 0.40 or a VT annual of not less than 0.26 is determined in accordance with section C 303.1.3. Now to do that, you go to this formula and you use a minimum skylight effective aperture determined in accordance with equation 4.4. 2.1, not less than 1% using a skylight's VT rating, or 2.2, not less than 0.66% using a tubular daylight device's VT annual rating, gives you a formula of 0.085 times skylight area times skylight VT times WF over top light zone. And so to find out what WF is, you got to come over here and say area weight average well factor, where well factor is 0.9 if light well depth is less than 2 feet, or 0.7 if light well depth is 2 feet or greater, or 1.0 for tubular daylight devices with VT annual ratings. I can go on and on and on like that reading this section, and I can do that through this whole code book. So
Is that why we don't have very many skylights in Victoria?
you know, for a while there, we were trying to avoid skylights because it created a hole in the roof, you know, another area for water leaks. And so now they're required to start coming into play on certain structures. But then you have to get into these, to determine which ones are required. There's another fun, I should say, equation. And it's like that through this whole book. And how am I supposed to teach a contractor to do this and get the plans right? I'd never get a permit issued. So we needed to simplify it. And we could look at that by saying, well, if you have to get an engineer involved in your construction at 5,000 square feet or an architect at 20,000 square feet, why don't we draw those lines there and say, if you are over 5,000 square feet, you may need to do a certain code. Or if you're over 20,000 square feet, which I think that's where we landed with at the workshops, skylights will come into play, because architects can come in there and design skylights and do this kind of stuff. So, because along with skylights, you have daylight zones where the light comes in and you have to do calculations for it to shut the lights off that are around the skylight. There's automatic controls. So it just doesn't stop there, it just keeps going. And it gets very, very involved. There's a lot of people in this room can figure this out, but it's gonna take a while. And by the time we figure it out, they'll be writing another code. So that's one of the reasons we went in here and tried to simplify this. I tried to insert a lot of stuff in the code to address these issues. I think they're right. If during when we're using them and find maybe kinks in them, we'll need to come back and address those. I mean, this is like pulling weeds out of your flower bed. You know, you pull a weed and it's rooted like in 5 spots, and you're like, wow. That's kind of how this is. You got codes. If you change one, it might change 2 or 3 things in another section. There's another exception that leads you to another section, and it just goes on and on. So it's fun to try to figure that out. I think I've kind of simplified some of this to where it's usable. So that's why you'll see the 5,000 and the 20,000 square foot come into play. So with acoustical ceilings, we just figured less than 5,000 square feet, maybe we should allow the acoustical ceilings to be used for insulation and start allowing those to be put back used again. We ran into problems, and this is one of Raleigh's, one of the things he wanted to address was we would go into a structure and we'd be working in 1/3 of it, and we'd tear this whole thing out, and they weren't gonna do anything to the rest of the building. The rest was fine. But because this one had acoustical ceiling in it, we couldn't go back with the insulation on the ceiling tiles, although the rest of the building already still had it. We had to put the insulation up on the deck. And one, you got air conditioning, you got fire sprinklers, you got all kinds of stuff up there that you can't get around. So it made things real difficult. So we were just, well, let's just do the best we can. And this would allow us to drop those, drop that insulation back on top of those ceiling tiles. That's only up to 5,000 square feet buildings. If you're over that, then then you can incorporate your design professional to figure out how to address that. So that's the deal with acoustical ceilings. Table 1402.1.3 requires installation wall ceilings and roofs to be placed in cavity and requires an additional continuous liner. This was another one that Raleigh had mentioned to me. And it's basically talking about the same thing. You got to go up to your roof deck and put insulation in it, but you can't because you got things all over the place. And it requires insulation between the rafters, and now the 2015 codes were requiring an additional liner that went across the entire thing. So we discussed that we would, work with that kind of stuff if we need, and this is going to come up in the existing buildings section where we're going to work with that kind of stuff, where you can just put the two layers and build up your insulation in your rafters to meet the required depth. Along this might be a good place to mention that table again. So with just like the residential code, we deal with these tables in commercial code that has a prescribed way of doing stuff. We were, at this point, we created another table much like the residential code. And basically, it's a lot like it. The way we see it is, if it's good enough, if your insulation is good enough in a residence, why isn't it good enough in a business? I mean, you have the same type of construction. Some of these businesses are 1,500 square feet. But it doesn't have the same requirements. So what you would do with this code, you'd say, okay, it's basically the same table used for residential purposes. You have R13 in your walls, you have R30 in ceilings, you have solar heat gain of 30 in the windows, and the builder knows what to do. So they're using the same table as you do for a residence. And that's up to 5,000 square feet. Once you exceed 5,000, well, then you need to incorporate that design professional to figure out how to make that meet code. So I skipped the actual PowerPoint. So I'm going to back up to that to make sure I didn't miss anything. Significant changes not as relevant due to local amendments. There were 34 significant local amendments. We deleted sections, which I might mention here, was data centers. That there was another chapter in the Energy Code book that's brand new, and it's got a lot of stuff in it. So didn't have time really to look it over. I asked a couple of contractors, HVAC contractors, if they had some chance, and they didn't. So we decided that's additional requirements. So we just held on to that for now. We'll study it later. If we need it, we can bring it back. If it's not needed, then we can just leave it out of the code. Economizers has been deleted from code. That's a system that doesn't work in this geographic area. We've never applied the economizer requirement. It was, I think, accidentally put in code for this climate zone, but that will be deleted if council approves. Automatic receptacle controls with automatic receptacle control functions. Those are another requirement where the walls and the wall plugs would have to shut off automatically at some time or another. I didn't review it. I just figured we're not going to do that. And then we deleted the residential provisions out of the code because that was just a rewrite from the residential stuff into the commercial. And if we left it in, I would have had to amend that entire residential section. So we just deleted the residential provisions. And we can use the residential code for that. Also, the IECC allows for trade-offs by design professionals and submission of comm checks to show compliance. That's where we're talking about these design professionals that they're working with buildings over 5,000 square foot. They can come in now and trade off stuff. In the past, you really couldn't do a lot of trading off. Now you can say, hey, I can't seem to put that much insulation in the attic, but I can put more in the walls, and I can get you some better solar heat gain in the windows. And what we'll do is ask them for this comp check. It's a software that they put their numbers in, and at the bottom, it tells you if it complies or if it doesn't. And that's something that we would ask of the design professionals to submit those comp checks to show compliance. If they can do that, then we'll accept the plans. This section and this code now will also, through our amendments, is going to allow for like replacement of insulation when less than 50% of the building is being altered. Again, if you're tearing some insulation out of the walls and stuff, whatever's in that existing structure, you're allowed to replace. So it kind of matches the rest of the building. And that's up to 50% though. So after that, we need to comply with the new requirements. We removed the mandatory skylight requirements for buildings under 20,000 square foot. That's what I mentioned just a minute ago. After 20,000 square feet, you get an architect involved, and we'll decide how to put those skylights in. It also creates many exceptions for buildings less than 5,000 square feet and establishes that table, C40215, for compliance values. That's that table that we mentioned earlier. Going on to number 3, roof reflectance. There's another formula there that you have to run. I haven't done this yet, but we need to establish a number for that to get a roof reflectance, just like we did with that table, and plug it in there and say our roof reflectance is going to be this. And if you have that, if you meet that number there, you're in compliance and the plans will be acceptable. Same as we do with the walls and the ceilings. 402, 4025, let's see. Fenestration section requires daylight controls. Again, that's your daylight controls, not only on skylights, but on windows of a building. There's a requirement in the energy code that if you have windows in the structure and there are light fixtures next to it, you have to do some calculations to determine how much light comes in, because those lights that are within those zones are going to have to be automatic shut off. And so when the sun comes up, if the sun goes down, they can turn on, but when the sun comes up, they all shut off. During the day, they'll be turned off because you have that, you can take advantage of that daylight through the windows. And so when they say fenestration here, they're referring to windows. Now, buildings over 5,000 square foot, because you're having to incorporate an engineer to do the designs, your electrical designs, that's when we determine, well, then at that point, then we'll get the professionals involved on daylight controls and that type of stuff. Because like I said, we want to stay energy efficient. We want to be reasonable though. And, we got to draw that line somewhere. The max fenestration windows has a 30% allowable. Once again, the 5,000 square foot comes into play. Under 5,000 square foot, we'll go to that table that we created and use the prescribed number there from that table and say, Mr. Contractor, if you use 30 in those windows, you're good. If the building's over 5,000 square foot, you'll need to get an energy person to do the calcs, or you need to get a design professional to show that your windows meet code. The next one, the skylight fenestration, I think I jumped ahead and covered that. Going on to I covered economizers, number 7, we deleted that from the section, from the code. Building energy envelope performance, continue the inspectors to do visual performance inspections in lieu of an air leakage test. I think we were headed to do air leakage test requirements on structures and kind of bypass the inspectors looking at it. So we do a fairly good job going and making sure everything's sealed tight and that there's the proper insulation is properly installed and that type of stuff. We're going to continue that, so we amended code to allow us to continue to do that. Data centers, I talked about that. We deleted that out of code. That needs further study.
I think you can jump down to that one.
I can? Good. Well, energy monitoring. Energy monitoring, not required in buildings of 20,000 square foot. So a lot of this is 20,000 because that's where your architects are needed. Mechanical plans submitted for buildings under 5,000 square require manual and calculation on approved standard ACA form. I think that there was just kind of focused on getting a standardized form. I'm getting all kinds of different kinds of forms for manual ends. That's how you calculate your heat and loads and stuff. So we'd like to standardize something to where we can just get one form or a couple of forms where we understand what we're looking at. Everybody's doing it the same way. So we'll be looking for that during plan submittal. Com checks will continue to be required on all new construction. And that will be continued. So we currently do that. Yeah, and that kind of covers the energy code stuff for new construction, alterations and repairs also. We'll get into some more existing building stuff at the very, very end. But yeah, any questions so far?
I got a suggestion. I find this stuff riveting, but I know not everybody else does. Is there any way you can maybe like pick out, a couple of the highlights for each of these remaining ones? And, because some of them are pretty,
Sure.
pretty self-explanatory, like drinking fountains need to be high and low. That's about it. And it's right in front of us, so
Okay.
maybe it'll speed it up just a little bit, and I
Okay.
enjoy it, though.
Self-explanatory to you, maybe.
If y'all don't agree with me, we can keep going.
Keep going.
Let's talk about the amendments, if y'all want, instead of the, that was pretty much energy code. We combined
Yeah.
actually the mechanical, plumbing, and fuel and gas code because actually we don't have any significant amendments. There were 23 significant changes. So if y'all just want to take a second, maybe ask us any questions on, that's page 5.
Some of these codes, though, pertain to not just commercial.
Right, that's what I thought.
True.
In these sections here, right? Because closed dryer ventilation requiring 3-foot separation.
Well,
Remote vent in the
so
buildings and whole home outside air control.
that was
shall be labeled.
definitely in the commercial code. Yes, they would, some of them do apply and some of them don't. I'd have to look at that. Yeah.
There's a lot of that crossover too. So we covered it in this, in the board meetings under the mechanical code, but you'll see some of that same crossover as it being in the residential code as well.
Well, I would ask is if we could on some of those that cross over, that we make sure that the residential contractors know that they really don't apply, even though it says, whole house outside air controls shall be labeled.
Yeah. Yeah, that pertains to commercial structures.
Yeah, but it says whole house, so.
Yeah, it kind of is worded odd.
So just, can go back and answer it later, but just make sure residential clarifies that it's IRC only.
Yes, sir.
We can do that.
Yeah, because you're integrating both commercial and residential on your presentation, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's one question that I was going to ask later was, when somebody goes in there and gets a commercial permit, they're going to be given only the commercial codes, not the residential, and vice versa. So that way, we don't have somebody coming up and saying, hey, they gave us the wrong codes to follow, and, because they're so similar. Because I'm looking at it and I'm like, Jeff, this looks like it should be more residential than it's commercial. This section, page 5. So it's just like whenever somebody goes to go get a permit, that they are told which departments they have to go in what order, so that way they don't make so many trips down to, planning.
And the MEP contractors, because of their state licensing and continuing education, They come to us really, they're pretty clear when they have a question and come, and it's a very specific question. We don't usually get a lot of confusion or questions from our MEP contractors. Because in some ways, they're bigger experts than us based off of their, experience and education.
Okay.
Last section, the last code is the existing building code, but between that, we actually have the, Tom to come and talk some about the fire code sections. So we'll turn it over to Tom right now.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and Mayor-elect. We're going to address the International Fire Code. The difference with the fire code is it does address new construction, but also the operation of the buildings once they've been completed. So there's going to be some back and forth as far as what's considered retroactive requirement versus what's a new construction. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I know we got a couple different things that in here that are significant philosophy changes for the fire marshal's office. So we'd like to address those. I'm going to do high level over each chapter real quick. We're going to start off with chapter 1, which is the scope and administration. One of the things that we're proposing is operational permits. Operational permits are for a business that uses typically a higher hazard type business. It gives us the ability to provide an additional layer of review so we can evaluate the emergency plans. We can evaluate any other type of safety requirements that may be needed. And it provides us the ability to gather information so we can submit that to our firefighters and they can have that while they're responding to the calls. So a perfect example would be something like the Citgo terminal on Houston Highway. Knowing what tank has what fuel in it, being able to get that to the hands of the responders, so that would fall under for example, our hazardous materials permit. On the last page of the handout is a list of the operational permits that we're proposing. It does not affect every single business, only the businesses that have particularly higher hazard type operations. Just real briefly on the operational permit process, we will have an online application and an online guidebook to help those businesses identify whether or not they need the permit, on how to do that. They will be able to submit their permits, applications online. We would go out and conduct our inspection, and on our software system, we are able to issue the permit right there and email it to them. These permits do not have any fees associated with them. So we're trying to minimize the impact to the business, but still gather the information that we feel is important for responding.
For hot work operations, that is a weld shop?
For like a fixed welding shop, yes.
And is this for these operational permits, is that for new businesses or existing businesses are gonna have to?
It will be for new and existing.
Okay.
We know it's going to take us time to not only reach out to all these businesses, but to complete the application process, so we are not holding them to a deadline that says they have to come to us. We know it's going to be a big educational period, educational effort on our part. We just want to be able to build this information. We see the value of it long-term.
What's the definition here of an operational permit for refrigeration equipment?
That would be, for example, the refrigeration equipment at a grocery store where it's using typically ammonia or some other type of hazardous chemical. So and a regular refrigerator wouldn't require it, but a mechanical refrigeration system would.
Okay.
On this list, it just has the word magnesium.
So that would be to store, use, or manufacture anything with magnesium. Magnesium is a combustible metal and burns very hot and typically cannot be extinguished with water.
Okay, it's kind of an odd thing to have on the list. Maybe people that work with it understand that, but I would have
Right.
put, business that something or.
And to my knowledge, we don't have any businesses that are doing a large amount of magnesium, but maybe a small machine shop might have do some minor magnesium work.
Okay, thank you.
I always thought of it as a supplement.
Exactly. So
Need an
the
operational permit.
the pharmacies in their vitamins section.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on the operational permits? And if something comes to you, feel free to ask later on. Chapter 2 added some additional definitions that didn't exist before, self-service storage facilities. That's been a big one because it was always vague how the code interpreted it. They finally defined it and then gave us a prescribed method to protect those buildings. When we do our inspections on a self-storage facility, we do not go into every single unit. We do not go into a leased unit. So we have no idea what's being stored there. So that's why that's why the fire code addressed it. Additive manufacturing, 3D printing is a new technology that the code's trying to get ahead of. Redefine the definition of change of occupancy for when an inspection is required, and energy storage systems.
So energy storage systems, batteries, backups.
Right, and we're talking the large battery backups, not just a simple small one for your computer, but something for
What about like
the
you,
utility support.
you do solar at your house and you have a residential battery storage,
We are not looking at the residential,
just commercial?
just commercial.
Okay.
But a photovoltaic system on a rooftop of a commercial building would be something that we would definitely be interested in the construction aspect of it. Chapter 3, the International Fire Code pulled in mobile food vendors. As you know, we have a standing mobile food vendor ordinance. With the adoption of the fire code, we're going to have to modify and adjust our mobile food vendor ordinance. A lot of what we had in that initial ordinance was actually drafted in the fire code. So again, we were kind of ahead of the game in the fire code business. So Chapter 4, emergency planning preparedness. A lot of this is your emergency plans, and now it does address large gatherings and special events. We are going to look at an operational permit with large gatherings, which would be anything over 1,000. There would be no fee to it, but it would be a way for us to prepare emergency response to those large gatherings. If it's something at an existing building or an existing facility like a stadium or a church or an arena, then those would be exempted, as well as parades. But this gives us the ability to make sure that we take the appropriate precautions in these large gatherings because of the incidents that have occurred at different locations, whether it be vehicles running into past barricades or any other active threats. So it's something that we will partner with the police department too, as well as on that planning process. Chapter 5 covers technical requirements for emergency responder communication coverage. What that basically means is that the Energy Conservation Code is making it harder and harder for our radios to penetrate buildings. So we're having issues with our radios not working. So this provides us with a way to address that to where we can actually make sure our radios do work. Chapter 9, fire protection. We talked about it earlier in the building code about the different ways to protect the attics in multifamily housing. And then new requirements for carbon dioxide systems. Chapter 10, we talked about in the building code as well, is the exit illumination along the path of travel out to the public way. Chapters 9 and 10 in the fire code and the building code mirror each other, so we just have to make sure we get all of our amendments and comments together. Other significant changes, Chapter 22, dust explosion prevention. Fortunately, we do not have any large facilities that has a combustible dust threat, but it is in there. Chapter 23 addresses repair garages with vehicles powered by liquid propane and liquefied natural gas. And then Chapter 31, tents, temporary special event structures and other membrane structures, adds on to what was earlier with the special events, the outdoor assembly event protection requirements. This would be things like if you have a tent over a certain square footage, exit signs would be required, fire extinguishers would be required, just general fire safety precautions. Chapter 33 handles fire safety during construction and demolition, adds a little bit of caveat to the owner's responsibility. Before it was primarily to the contractor. This actually adds it to the building owner. And then additional water supply requirements, trying to get firefighting water supply established as soon as possible and extending it as much as it can. We've seen the buildings in Houston area and other areas where an apartment site under construction, and they'll have a fire and it'll burn 9 of their 10 buildings that are under construction. So that's trying to address those. Chapter 38 addresses higher education laboratories. 39, processing and extraction facilities. Right now, the state hasn't legalized marijuana yet in that type of process, but just in case they do, this chapter is already established to do that. And then chapter 40, storage of distilled spirits and wines. Those are new chapters. Chapter 50, hazardous materials. That's where we pick up the operational permit, as we described before. Chapter 53 is compressed gases. Requires a gas detection system in rooms or indoor areas that contain carbon dioxide enrichment processes or storage containers. So that even comes down to your gas stations that have bulk CO2 will now be required to have a compressed gas alarm system. So that way, if there's a leak from that carbon dioxide, they'll be able to know about it before somebody walks in, and because it's colorless and odorless, and cause some problems.
That existing?
I do believe it does go to an existing locations as well. But I'll double check on that. Chapter 57, this is kind of a nice little concierge service. There is a business called on-demand mobile fueling, which if you don't feel like going to the gas station, they will come and fill your car up for you. So they've addressed that in the fire code. I'm not aware of any operators at this time in Victoria, or not any known operators, but I think that may be something that's coming about. And then we've adopted a couple appendices. Appendix F gives us the ability to identify the classifications for the placard, which is what you see on the PowerPoint. It just basically classifies what's corrosive, what's radioactive or water reactive or a health hazard. Appendix H is a guide for those hazardous materials facilities on how to complete their management plan and their inventory statement. So it's basically a template for them to fill it out. So we're not giving them something, hey, do this, with no guidance. It's an actual template that they can basically check the boxes and fill out the information that's pertinent to their operation. And then Appendix I actually assists the fire marshal's office when it comes to fire alarm systems, fire sprinkler systems, when a system is not working or has a device that's not working, and helps us identify non-compliant conditions. Real quick on the local amendments, again, mirroring the building code. This is the reconstruction remodel, the 50% of the assessed value. Again, it's just a mirror of the building code. A couple others in chapter 11, which is the existing building, which is the one that has some retroactive requirements to it. One of the sections talks about where alcoholic beverages are consumed in A2 occupancies, having an occupant load greater than 350. Sprinklers are required to be installed retroactively by December 31st, 2023. That date is subjective anyway. We can adjust that date however we need to. The initial code said 300. We bumped it up to 350 and talked to the two businesses that were affected by it, and they've both agreed to reduce to meet that requirement so they don't have to sprinkler. In fact, one of the businesses, the business that had to reduce by 44, came to us even before we knew this was coming to us.
What is an A2?
A2 is bars, nightclubs, restaurants. Another one, as he sees a strike through, one of the requirements in that chapter is that anything that's an I2 occupancy, which is psychiatric hospital, skilled nursing home, or that type of institutional facility where people are not able to self-rescue, would be required to be sprinklered on that floor and any floors between that occupancy and the exit. We're proposing to strike that. We do have one business in town that does meet that that does fall into that category. And then we have another local amendment requesting that existing fire alarm systems be monitored by an approved supervising station, which basically means right now, if they activate, it does not automatically call the fire department. So that alarm can go, it requires somebody to call 911 to notify us. This would put the monitoring on it to where it would automatically call us. Are there any questions? Thank you.
So I'll just wrap it up with the last one being the International Existing Building Code, and we don't really have significant changes or significant local amendments because the purpose of the existing building code is make it a lot easier to remodel and deal with existing buildings. It's basically taking the building code and is significantly lessening the rules. We do on the handout have how the energy code is reduced for our existing buildings, which Rick, I think, pretty much already covered as much as we want to hear on energy code about like for like and insulation. Making sure all the HVAC equipment and things can be matched in size to the old units. And so that basically sums up for the existing building code changes. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that y'all may have for any of us. But that's just a snippet of the building codes, as you know.
Yeah, we know
I
that.
joked with Rick if he was going to bring all the books, but he said he couldn't carry them all, so I only brought the energy code.
Are we scheduled to do second and third readings next week?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And again, we had a deadline for ISO to maintain our rating, and we will meet that deadline, thankfully,
Okay.
if council votes.
Thank y'all for working hard on all those amendments. I know it took a lot to go through there.
Well, George and Rick are the superstars, and I also want to take a minute to recognize George, who will actually be leaving us. He's retiring August 31st, and Rick and I both begged him to stay, and he said he's got fishing to do. So we're very, very sad, but we could not have. This process really went very smooth with a lot of George's help in putting these handouts together and kind of reviewing all those significant change books with Rick. It's just very time consuming.
George, just leave us your phone number in case we need you.
Need a fishing buddy?
Okay. Any more questions? If we have no more questions, meeting's adjourned at 6:22.
Good job.
Yes. I didn't see